There is a stretch of road outside Caldwell County where the asphalt gives up and turns to dust, and the dust remembers things the people don't. I've driven that road maybe 4,000 times in my life. I never noticed the bus shelter until the morning a child was sitting in it alone with a cardboard suitcase and a winter coat in the middle of July. I want to tell you something true before I tell you anything else. I am not a kind man by nature. I'm 71 years old now, and I have spent most of those years being hard with people, because being hard was easier than being disappointed. I buried two of my own, and I never cried where anybody could see it. So when I tell you that one small girl with a runny nose and somebody else's name pinned to her coat changed the whole shape of my life, you should understand that I am the least likely person in 3 counties to say a thing like that and mean it. But I do mean it. This is the story of how the richest man any of us had ever known stopped on that road, and what it cost him, and what it gave back. It's a story about being left behind, and about the difference between the people who leave you and the people who stay. Stay with me. I promise you'll want to know how it ends. I'm still not entirely sure I believe how it ended myself. The girl was crying when Wade found her, but she was doing it quietly, which is the kind of crying that breaks a person worse than the loud kind. I know this because I was there. I was the one riding shotgun in his truck that morning, and I have replayed the next 90 seconds in my head more times than I can count. My name is Earl Tolliver. I ran cattle on the land that bordered Wade Kessler's spread for the better part of 40 years, and for most of that time, I'd have told you Wade Kessler was a cold son of a gun with more money than sense and less heart than a fence post. I was wrong about exactly one of those 3 things. We weren't supposed to be on that road at all. Wade had a hand at the auction barn over in Lockhart, and we'd taken the back way because Wade hated traffic and hated waiting and hated, generally, the company of other human beings. The radio was off. Wade didn't talk in the mornings. That suited me fine. I'd known him going on 30 years, and I figure we'd exchanged maybe 100 sentences in all that time that weren't about livestock prices or weather, or the precise and unforgivable failings of the federal government. Then he hit the brakes. He didn't say anything. He just slowed the truck down so gradual I thought maybe he'd seen a deer. I looked where he was looking, and there was the bus shelter, gone gray and rust-streaked, with the schedule sign so faded you couldn't read a single time on it. And under the little tin roof on the bench was a girl. She couldn't have been more than 7. She had hair the color of dry creek mud, and she tried to braid it herself, you could tell, because one side was tight and neat and the other had come apart into a tangle. She wore a quilted winter coat zipped to the chin even though it was already pushing 90 degrees and the cicadas were screaming in the heat. Beside her sat a cardboard box tied with twine, and on the lapel of that coat somebody had pinned an index card. Wade put the truck in park in the middle of the road. He sat there with both hands on the wheel. "That's a kid," I said, which was, I'll admit, not the most useful observation a man ever made. "I can see that, Earl." He didn't move. And here is the thing I noticed even then, before I understood any of what was coming. Wade Kessler was afraid. I'd seen that man stare down a charging bull, and I'd seen him fire 3 men in a single afternoon without his voice changing pitch, and I had never once seen him afraid of anything. But his jaw was working, and his knuckles had gone white on the steering wheel, and he was looking at that little girl like she was a live wire down in a puddle. "Somebody'll be along," he said. "Wade, it's not our business. Wade, there's nobody else on this road. There's not gonna be anybody else on this road. We're it." He sat there a moment longer. Then he turned off the engine. I remember that detail because it meant something. Turning off the engine meant we weren't going to be quick about this. Meant whatever was about to happen was going to take long enough that the truck might as well rest. We got out. The heat hit like a hand. The girl looked up when our boots crunched on the gravel, and she did the thing that I still can't shake all these years later. She scooted closer to her cardboard box, put her arm around it like it was a living thing, and made herself smaller. She didn't run. She didn't cry harder. She just got smaller and waited to find out what we were going to do to her, the way an animal does when it's learned that the world mostly does things to it rather than for it. Wade stopped about 10 feet off. He took his hat off. I don't know why. I think it was instinct, the way you take your hat off in a church or at a graveside, like he understood without being told that he'd walked into a holy place. "Hey there," he said. His voice came out rough and strange. Wade Kessler did not talk to children. I would have bet the deed to my own land that he had never in his 60-odd years addressed a single word to a person under the age of 18. The girl didn't answer. I went around the other side, slow, and crouched down so I wasn't standing over her. I'm better with people than Wade, which isn't saying a great deal, but I do have grandkids. "What's your name, sweetheart?" She looked at the index card on her coat like she expected me to read it. I leaned in. In wobbly grown-up handwriting it said, "This is Sadie. Be good to her. I'm sorry." That was all. No phone number. No last name. No address. "I'm sorry," like an apology could be pinned to a child and left on a bench to do the explaining a person was too cowardly to do themselves. I felt something move in my chest that I didn't have a name for. I looked up at Wade, and his face had gone the color of ash. "How long you been sitting here, Sadie?" I asked her. She held up 2 fingers. Then in a voice so small I had to lean closer to hear it, she said she'd come back, after she got the money. She said wait right here and don't move and she'd come back. A pause. I didn't move. 2 days. The shelter had no shade to speak of after noon. There was a half-empty bottle of warm water by her foot. I don't know what she'd eaten, if anything. I have done a lot of hard things in my life. I have pulled calves out of cows in the freezing rain at 3 in the morning, and I have sat by hospital beds, and I have shoveled dirt onto coffins that held people I loved. I am telling you that the hardest thing I ever did up to that point in my life was to keep my voice steady and not let that little girl see a grown man's face fall apart, because she had been good. She had done exactly what she was told. She had waited 2 days in the heat for a mother who was never coming back, and she was proud of how well she'd waited. "You did real good," I told her. "You waited just like she said." She nodded solemn. "I have to keep waiting." And that's when Wade Kessler crouched down in the dust in his $800 boots and did the thing that started everything. Let me back up and tell you who Wade was, because it matters. Because the man crouching in the dust was not the man anyone in Caldwell County thought they knew. Wade Kessler owned the biggest ranch in the region and a good deal else besides. Oil leases his daddy had left him, a stake in a feed company, land that crept outward year by year as smaller outfits failed and Wade bought them up at the bottom. He was, by any measure anybody could come up with, the richest man for 100 miles in any direction, and he was hated for it mostly, not actively. Just the low background hatred a hard, small place keeps for a man who has more than it does and doesn't apologize. He'd had a wife once, Lorna. She died of cancer the same year my own boy passed, which was part of why Wade and I had a kind of understanding even if we never talked about it. We'd grieved in the same season and we both did it the wrong way, alone and angry. After Lorna, Wade got harder. Folks said he'd had a son too, way back, and that something had happened, but nobody knew what, and Wade was not a man you asked. He kept the house dark. He ran his business like a blade. He gave to no charities, attended no funerals but the ones he couldn't get out of, and was known to have evicted a tenant family the week before Christmas, because the rent was the rent and Wade Kessler did not believe in exceptions. That was the man. That was the man who crouched down in front of Sadie and said, in a voice I'd never heard him use, "I had a little girl once." I stared at him, a son the rumor went, not a girl. I'd known him 30 years and never heard this. Sadie looked at him. Her name was Annie, Wade said. He wasn't looking at me. He wasn't looking at anything really except some point 1,000 yards behind Sadie's head. She'd be a grown woman now. She got sick when she was about your size, little younger maybe, he swallowed. And I was working. I was always working. I had so much going on. I had deals and I had the ranch, and I told her mama I couldn't make it to the doctor, and I told her I'd be there for the next one. His hands were shaking now. I'd never seen Wade Kessler's hands shake. There wasn't a next one, Sadie. That's the thing about little girls. Sometimes there isn't a next one, and I was working. The cicadas screamed. The heat pressed down. I stood there and felt like an intruder on something that had been locked up for decades and was now coming open in the worst possible place, on the worst possible day, in front of a child who couldn't understand it. But here's the thing about children. She understood enough. Sadie looked at this big, weathered stranger crying without making any sound, tears just running down into the lines of his face, and she did what no adult in that situation would have had the courage to do. She reached out one small hand and patted his arm, the way you'd comfort a dog, the way you'd comfort anybody. "It's okay," she told him. "Maybe she's just waiting somewhere like me." Wade Kessler made a sound I will never forget. It wasn't a sob exactly. It was more like the sound a tree makes right before it goes over, a deep splitting groan from somewhere structural, somewhere load-bearing. He put his big hand over her small one, and he held it there. "Yeah," he said, "maybe she is." We couldn't leave her there. That much was obvious even to Wade. But what to do with her was a tangle I didn't see the bottom of. The right thing, the lawful thing, was to drive her to the sheriff's office in town and let the county take her. There were systems for this: child protective services, foster placement, people whose actual job it was to handle a child abandoned at a bus stop with an index card for a goodbye. I said as much, standing by the truck while Sadie ate the granola bar I keep in the glove box like it was the first real food she'd seen. "No," Wade said. "Wade, we can't just, she's not a stray kitten. There's laws, there's." "I know what there is, Earl." He was watching her eat. "You know what there is when the county takes them. You know where they go. To a family, a foster. To a placement." He said the word like it tasted bad. "To a stranger's house where she's a check that comes in the mail, and then maybe another house, and another. I looked into all this once." He stopped. "After Annie, I thought about doing something with the money, helping kids like," he shook his head. I never did a damn thing. I just kept it all and let it pile up." I didn't know what to say to that. "I'm not handing her to the county," Wade said. "Not today. Maybe that makes me a fool, and maybe it makes me a criminal, I don't know. But she waited 2 days on a bench because somebody told her to wait, and the next thing that happens to her is not gonna be another stranger telling her to wait somewhere else. So we did the thing you're not supposed to do. We took her home. Not to my place, Wade's, the big house. And I went along because somebody with sense needed to be there, and because, if I'm honest, I couldn't have left either of them. Not the girl and not the broken old man who'd cracked open in front of her. The drive took 40 minutes. Sadie fell asleep before we'd gone 5, slumped against her cardboard box in the back seat, finally letting go now that 2 grown men had taken the waiting off of her. Wade kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror like he was afraid she'd vanish. "What was in the box?" I asked quietly. "You look." "No," Wade said. "Not gonna either, that's hers." I let it go. I found out later what was in it, and I'll tell you when we get there because it matters, but Wade was right not to look. Some things a person has to show you. You don't take them. The house, when we got there, was exactly as cold and grand and empty as you'd imagine. Wade had a housekeeper, Marisol, who came 3 days a week and who had worked for him for 20 years and who, I would learn, was the only person on earth Wade Kessler ever apologized to. She took one look at the sleeping child in the back seat and at Wade's face, and she did not ask a single question. She just went inside and started running a bath. We carried Sadie in. She woke up halfway and got scared, and for a minute she fought us, thrashing and crying out a name, "Mama, Mama," and it was about the worst thing I ever heard. Wade held her and didn't try to shush her, just let her cry it out against his chest. This enormous hard man standing in his marble foyer rocking a child he'd known for under an hour, saying nothing, just being a thing solid enough to hold onto. When she settled, she looked up at him with her face all swollen, and asked the question that I think decided everything. "Are you gonna leave me too?" And Wade Kessler, who had never in his life made a promise he wasn't certain he could keep, who ran every contract through 3 lawyers and trusted no man's word including frequently his own, looked that little girl dead in the eye and said, "No, never, not as long as I'm breathing." I should have stopped him. You can't promise a thing like that. The world doesn't let you keep promises like that. There were going to be social workers, and there was going to be a mother who might come back, and there were 100 ways that promise could be broken by forces bigger than any one man's will, money or no money. But I didn't stop him, because I looked at his face when he said it, and I understood that Wade Kessler wasn't making that promise to Sadie. He was making it to Annie, 40 years too late. That night, after Sadie was bathed and fed and finally, truly asleep in a guest room that had never held a guest, Wade and I sat on the back porch and didn't talk for a long time. The bottle of bourbon between us went down by a couple of inches. The stars came out the way they do out there, thick and close. "They'll come for her," I said finally. "You know that. You can't just keep a child you found at a bus stop. There's gonna be a process. There might be a mother out there. There might be family." "I know. So what's the plan, Wade? Because right now you've got no legal standing, and a lot of love is going to run into a lot of paperwork." He turned the glass in his hands, and for the first time all day, something like the old Wade came back into his face. The deal maker, the man who bought failing ranches at the bottom, the man who had never lost a negotiation he cared about winning. "I'm the richest man in this part of the world, Earl," he said quietly. "I never once used a dime of it for anything that mattered, not one dime." He looked out at the dark. "Watch what I can do when I finally decide to." I didn't know it then, but I had just watched a man come back from the dead. The fight that was coming would take everything he had, every lawyer, every favor, every dollar, and a few things money can't buy. He would lose more than once. He would come closer to losing her than I want to remember. But that's part 2. For now, I just want you to hold on to this. Somewhere in that big dark house, a little girl who'd been left behind was sleeping in a real bed for the first time in 2 days. And down the hall, a man who'd left someone behind himself, long ago, was finally deciding to stay. The index card was still pinned to her coat, which Marisol had hung carefully in the closet rather than throw away. "Be good to her, I'm sorry." We were going to be good to her. The sorry somebody else would have to carry. He letter came on a Tuesday, 6 weeks in, and it nearly ended everything. I need to back up, though, because a lot happens in 6 weeks when a child moves into a house, and I want you to feel the weight of what was on the line by the time that letter arrived. Otherwise, the letter is just paper. By that Tuesday, it was a bomb. Those 6 weeks changed Wade Kessler more than the previous 30 years combined. I watched it happen, and I still don't fully understand it. It was like watching a field that's been salted and dead come back green after one good rain. You know the rain didn't put the life there. The life was waiting underground the whole time, but you can't help feeling like you witnessed a small miracle anyway. Sadie didn't trust him at first. Why would she? Every adult in her life had taught her that affection was a thing that got withdrawn. She'd flinch when he raised his voice, not at her, never at her, but on the phone. In that hard businessman's bark, and Wade noticed the flinch the first time and never raised his voice in that house again. I watched the richest, hardest man in the county take his shouting outside, to the barn, to the truck, because a 7-year-old flinched. He didn't announce it. He didn't make a thing of it. He just changed. She started talking around week 2. Once she started, she didn't stop. She talked the way kids do who have been alone too long, a flood of it, Observations about the horses and questions about why the sky was blue and long rambling stories about a cat she'd had once before that her mother had given away. Wade listened to all of it. I'd find them at the kitchen table, him with his reading glasses pushed up on his head, her drawing pictures and narrating, and he'd be nodding along like she was reporting cattle futures. He taught her to ride, started her on the gentlest mare he owned, an old girl named Biscuit who hadn't been ridden in years, and he walked alongside that horse for hours with his hand on Sadie's back so she wouldn't fall. The first time she rode the length of the corral by herself she laughed, really laughed, this whole body sound, and I saw Wade Kessler turn away and wipe his face on his sleeve and pretend it was the dust. Marisol started staying for dinner. Then she started cooking enough that there were leftovers, which there had never been, because Wade ate like fueling a machine and nothing more. The house got warmer. Lamps got turned on in rooms that had been dark for years. Sadie left her drawings everywhere, taped to the refrigerator, to the windows, to Wade's office door, and Wade left every single one of them exactly where she put it. There's a man who'd had original oil paintings on his walls, and he covered them over with crayon horses and didn't move a one. In the box, I told you I'd tell you about the box. She showed Wade, not me, about 3 weeks in. He told me later, sitting on that same porch. Inside the cardboard box tied with twine was a child's whole world, a stuffed rabbit worn down to the threads, gray where it had once been white, a handful of photographs creased soft, a plastic bracelet, a church bulletin from some service folded small, and at the bottom, wrapped in a dish towel, a coffee mug that said "World's Best Mom." She packed her own bag, Wade told me, and his voice did the thing it did now, that catch it had never had before. Earl, that woman left her on a bench and the kids still packed the mom mug, still wrapped it up careful so it wouldn't break. He shook his head. What do you do with that? What do you do with a love like that that's just aimed at the wrong person? I didn't have an answer, I still don't. He'd started the legal machinery that first week. Wade did not do things halfway. He hired the best family law attorney in the state, drove to the Capitol to do it in person, and he started building the case to adopt her. It was not simple, it was the opposite of simple. First there was the matter of the mother. You can't adopt a child who has a living parent unless that parent's rights are terminated, and you can't terminate rights without finding the parent and giving them their day in court. So Wade's people went looking. The index card said Sadie. A school record, eventually located, gave a last name, Sadie Rourke. The mother was Danielle Rourke, 26 years old, with a record, possession mostly, and 1 count of child neglect that had been pled down. She'd left Sadie with a series of people over the years, boyfriends, a grandmother who'd since died. The bus stop was just the last in a long line of leavings. When the social worker first came to the house, a tired, decent woman named Pam who'd seen everything and expected the worst. I think she expected to find a rich man playing house with a child like a toy he'd bought. What she found was Sadie asleep on Wade's chest in the big armchair, while he read the cattle reports over her head, careful not to move and wake her. Pam stood in the doorway a long moment. Then she sat down and got out her forms, and her whole posture had changed. But decent as Pam was, the system was the system. The county had a duty to attempt reunification with the mother first. If Danielle Rourke could be found, and if she could demonstrate she'd cleaned up, and if a judge believed her, Sadie could be given back to the woman who left her on a bench. "Over my dead body," Wade said, when his lawyer explained it. "Mr. Kessler," the lawyer said carefully, "your money buys you a great many things. It does not buy you a child whose mother wants her back. The courts in this state lean hard toward biological parents. If she gets clean and shows up, then we make sure the court knows exactly what she did. We will, but I want you prepared. This is not a sure thing. You could do everything right and still lose her." I watched that land on Wade. You could do everything right and still lose her. For a man who'd spent his life believing that doing everything right was a guarantee, that the world paid out to those who were hard enough and smart enough and rich enough, It was like watching him learn a foreign language at 60-some years old. The language of not being in control. He didn't sleep much after that. I'd come over and find lights on at 2 in the morning, Wade in his office, not working, just sitting. Once I found him standing in the doorway of Sadie's room watching her sleep, and he didn't even hear me come up. "I keep thinking," he said, not turning around, "about Annie's room, after how I made Lorna keep the door shut because I couldn't stand to walk past it open." He was quiet a moment. "I told myself I'd never feel that again. That's why he gestured vaguely, and I knew he meant all of it, the hardness, the money piling up, the doors kept shut. You don't lose what you don't love. That was the whole plan, Earl. 40 years, that was the plan." "Hell of a plan." "Worked great," he said, and there was the old dry bite in it. "Right up until a kid patted my arm at a bus stop." So the letter, Tuesday 6 weeks in. It came in a plain envelope to Wade's P.O. box, forwarded from his lawyer. Danielle Rourke had been found. Or rather, she had found them. She'd seen something somewhere, maybe heard through the grapevine that a rich rancher had taken in a little girl from a bus stop. Small places talk. And in the letter, handwritten, she said she wanted her daughter back. She said she was getting clean. She said she'd made a mistake. She said she'd been desperate, that she'd left Sadie somewhere safe seeming because she had no food and no place, and she swore she thought, she'd be back in a day. She said a mother's love doesn't just stop, and that no amount of money gave a stranger the right to her child. And some of it, God help me, read true. That was the worst part. It wasn't the letter of a monster. It was the letter of a young woman who was drowning and had done a terrible thing the way drowning people do terrible things, thrashing, taking others down. There was real love in it, twisted up with real failure, and you couldn't cleanly hate her, and that made everything so much harder than if you could have. Wade read it standing in the kitchen. Read it twice. Then he set it down very carefully on the counter, and he walked out to the barn, and he stayed out there until well after dark. When he came back in, his face was set in a way I hadn't seen since the bus stop. The deal maker. The man who bought failing outfits at the bottom and never lost a fight he cared about. "She wants money," he said. "What?" "Read it again." He slid it across to me. "She doesn't say it, but read it again. No amount of money gives a stranger the right." She mentions the money 3 times. A woman who wants her daughter back doesn't keep bringing up how rich the other guy is. His jaw worked. "She wants me to offer." I read it again. He wasn't wrong. It was there if you looked. The bus stop hadn't been a desperate accident, or not only that. She'd left Sadie somewhere a child would be found, somewhere word would travel, and now she'd surfaced the moment that word reached a man with deep pockets. Maybe I'm cynical. Maybe Wade made me cynical, but I think we were both right. "So what do you do?" I asked. And here's where it gets heavy. Here's the decision I told you about, back at the start, the one that was morally heavy enough that I'm not sure to this day whether Wade did right or wrong. I'm not sure there was a right. Because Wade could have fought her in court. He had the lawyers, the money, the social worker on his side, a documented case of neglect, an index card that said "I'm sorry" in the mother's own hand. He'd likely have one. The mother had a record and a pattern, and Wade had 6 weeks of being a saint with receipts. He could have crushed Danielle Rourke in a courtroom and walked out with Sadie and never paid the woman a dime. That's what the hard old Wade would have done. Win, total victory, salt the earth. Instead, he did something I didn't expect. He set up a meeting with her. She came to the house. Wade insisted on it, wanted her to see the place, I think, wanted her to stand in the kitchen with the crayon horses on the refrigerator and the world's best mom mug now living on the windowsill where Sadie had put it. He sent Sadie to town with Marisol for the day. He didn't want the child anywhere near it. I was there because Wade asked me to be in case. Well, in case. Danielle Rourke was small. That surprised me. She was thin and young, and her hands shook a little, and whether that was nerves or withdrawal or both, I couldn't say. She stood in that grand kitchen and looked at the drawings on the fridge, and I watched something cross her face that I'll never forget. She recognized the artist. A mother knows her own child's drawings. She put her hand to her mouth. "She's been drawing horses," Wade said, flat, giving nothing away. "She always loved horses," Danielle said, and her voice broke on it. "Since she was a baby, she stopped, composed herself, tried to find the harder footing she'd come in on. I'm her mother. I came to get my daughter." "Sit down," Wade said. She sat, so did he across the table. I stayed standing by the door. What Wade said next, he'd worked out in the barn the night before, I think, every word. He laid it out like a contract because that was the only language he fully trusted, but underneath the contract was something else, something I don't have a tidy word for. "I think you love her," he said. "I think that's true. I also think you can't take care of her, and I think part of why you're here is the same part that left her at a bus stop. You're hoping somebody else will solve it for you. And I think you know in court I'd win. So here's what I'm offering, and I'm only going to say it once." He told her he would pay. Not a payoff. He was careful about that. His lawyer had been careful. There were ways and there were ways. He would pay for her to go to a real treatment program, the good kind, the kind that costs more than she'd see in years. He would pay for her to get on her feet after, housing, job training, a clean start, no strings. And in exchange, she would voluntarily relinquish her parental rights so that Sadie could be adopted into stability, into a home, into a life with a future, rather than be dragged through years of being given back and taken away and given back, each time a little more broken. "You can love her and let her go," Wade said. "Or you can love her and keep pulling her under with you. Those are the only two real choices in this room, and we both know it. And I think you came here today already knowing which one is the better one. I'm just making it possible for you to choose it without starving." The kitchen was dead silent. The clock ticked. Outside a horse whickered. Danielle Rourke put her face in her shaking hands and she cried. And it was not the calculated crying of someone angling for money. It was the crying of a person being told the truth about themselves by a stranger, and recognizing it, and having it, and knowing it was true. "You think I don't know," she said, finally muffled. "You think I don't know she's better off. I've known that her whole life. She looked up, wrecked. "That's the thing nobody tells you. Sometimes the most you can do for your kid is not be in their life. And I keep almost doing it, and then I can't. I come back because if I let her go, then what am I? Then what was any of it for?" And Wade Kessler, who had kept a door shut for 40 years rather than feel this exact feeling, looked at her with something that wasn't triumph at all. "I lost a little girl once," he said. Third time I'd heard him say it now, and it never got easier. "I'd give every dollar I have to go back and choose her over my work. Every dollar. You've still got the choice I'd kill for. Don't waste it being too proud to take a hand up." She didn't answer for a long time. Then she asked if she could see a picture. Not of Sadie now. She said she couldn't bear to see her happy in this house. Not yet, maybe not ever. A picture from before. Something to keep. Wade got her the photographs from the cardboard box. Let her take 2 of them. And when she left with the name of the treatment center and a number to call and Wade's word, which I had watched become a thing of value. She stopped at the door and said the thing that I think Sadie will read someday when she's old enough, because Wade wrote it all down for her. "Tell her I didn't stop because I didn't love her," Danielle said. "Tell her I stopped because I did. She won't understand that for a long time, but tell her when she can." Then she was gone down the long drive, and Wade stood at the window watching her go, and I realized he was holding the world's best mom mug, turning it in his hands. It wasn't clean. I want to be honest with you. It wasn't a tidy ending where the bad mother takes the money and the good rich man wins and everybody's relieved. Danielle Rourke relinquished her rights 3 months later, after she'd been in treatment long enough to do it with a clear head, which was Wade's condition. He wouldn't take a signature from a desperate woman, only from a sober one. He said a choice made out of desperation wasn't a choice, and he wouldn't build Sadie's whole life on top of one. The adoption went through the following spring. There were hearings. There was paperwork that took months. There was a day in court where the judge asked Sadie, gently, if she understood what was happening, and Sadie said, "Wade's gonna be my dad and he's not gonna leave." And the whole courtroom went quiet and the judge had to take a recess. But all of that was still ahead of us on the day Danielle Rourke drove away. On that day, all we had was a kitchen full of crayon horses and a man holding a coffee mug, and the knowledge that the hardest part might be over, or might be just beginning, because raising a child who's been left as many times as Sadie had is not a thing you finish. It's a thing you keep choosing every day for years. That night Sadie came home from town and ran to Wade and showed him a toy horse Marisol had bought her, and Wade got down on his knees on the kitchen floor to look at it properly, eye level, the way he always did with her now. "Did you have a good day?" she asked him. Kids ask that. They learn to ask it back. Wade looked at her for a second. At this child who'd been left on a bench, who he'd nearly lost in a letter, who he was going to spend the rest of his life making sure never waited for anyone again. "Best day in a long time, sweetheart," he said. And he wasn't lying. But I was standing right there, and I knew there was a whole storm still ahead of them, things even Wade's money and Wade's will couldn't fix, because some wounds don't heal on anybody's schedule. The adoption being final didn't fix Sadie. I think that's the thing nobody warns you about. You fight the whole war, the lawyers, the letter, the courtroom, the mother driving away down the long gravel drive, and you win. And then you find out that winning was just the beginning of the real work. She'd been theirs on paper for almost a year before the nightmares got worse instead of better. That surprised everybody but Marisol, who'd raised 4 kids of her own and who said it made perfect sense. She was waiting before, Marisol told me, drying dishes in the warm kitchen one evening while Sadie's screams came down the hall and Wade's heavy footsteps went up it. All that time she was holding herself together because she had a job. Wait on the bench. Be good. Don't move. Now nobody's asking her to hold together anymore, so she's falling apart. That's not getting worse, Earl. That's a child finally feeling safe enough to break. The nightmares were always the same, near as anybody could tell. Sadie would wake screaming, soaked in sweat, and for a few seconds she wouldn't know where she was, and she'd cry out for her mother, and then, worse, much worse, she'd go silent and small and start whispering, "I didn't move. I didn't move." I waited like she was still on the bench, like the whole new life was the dream and the bench was the truth she kept getting yanked back to. Wade slept in a chair in her room for the better part of 2 months. A man worth more money than I can count, sleeping upright in a child's chair so that when she woke screaming there'd be somebody there before the fear could finish forming. He aged in those 2 months. I could see it. But he never once complained, and he never once suggested she be sent to anybody, any specialist, any facility that would have taken her out of that house even for a night. He did get her a therapist, a good one, a kind woman who came to the ranch because Sadie did better on her own ground with the horses nearby. And slowly, the nightmares spaced out. A bad one every night became a bad one, every few nights became a bad one only when something stirred it up. A stranger's raised voice, a TV show with a bus in it, once a substitute teacher who told the class to wait right here and don't move, which sent Sadie into a panic so complete the school had to call Wade, and Wade left a meeting with 3 men in suits and drove 90 miles an hour to get her and never apologized to anybody for it. This is what I mean about the work not ending. Loving a child who's been left isn't a rescue. It's a long, patient, unglamorous staying put. It's being there at 3 a.m. for the 400th time. It's proving over and over past the point where any reasonable person would feel they'd proven it enough that you are not going to leave. Because the child has evidence. The child has years of evidence that people leave. You don't argue with that evidence. You just outlast it. Wade outlasted it. I want to tell you about the day I knew Sadie was going to be okay. Not fixed, you don't get fixed, none of us do, but okay. Rooted, sure of her ground. It was a little over 2 years after the bus stop. Sadie was 9, going on 10, and she'd grown into herself in a way that made the wary little creature from the shelter hard to find. She rode like she'd been born to it. She bossed the ranch hands around and they let her. She'd taken to following Wade everywhere, this small shadow in a too big hat, and Wade had taken to slowing his stride so she could keep up, which for a man who'd spent his life walking fast away from people was its own kind of miracle. There was a school thing, a family tree project, the kind of assignment that's a landmine for a kid like Sadie, and the teacher should have known better, but never mind. Sadie came home with the worksheet and Wade saw the look on her face and sat down with her at the kitchen table, the crayon horses long since replaced by her newer, better drawings, and he asked her what was wrong. "It says draw your family," she said, "and I don't." She stopped. "Do I put her, my first mom, or do I put you? I don't know the rules." I was at the far end of the table pretending to read the paper. I held very still. Wade thought about it. He didn't rush. That was one of the things that had changed in him most. He'd learned to sit with a hard question instead of bulldozing to the answer. "You put whoever you want, sweetheart," he said. "It's your tree. There's no rules on a person's own tree. Some trees have a lot of branches. Some have branches that broke off. Doesn't make it not your tree." Sadie chewed her pencil. "Can I put her on a branch that's kind of far away, and you closer?" "You can put everybody exactly where they go," Wade said. So she drew it, and on her family tree there was Danielle, way out on a far branch, small, with a little heart next to her name. And there was Wade, big at the center, with the word Dad in capital letters she'd gone over 3 times so it'd be dark. And there was Marisol, and there was me. She put me on there, an old neighbor with no blood relation. She put me on her tree. And there was Biscuit the horse, because to a kid a horse is family, and why shouldn't it be? And at the bottom, under all of it, she'd written a title for the whole thing. Kids do that, title their drawings. This one she'd titled, "My Family That Stayed." Wade had to leave the room. He went out to the barn and I gave him a while and then I followed, and I found him standing with his forehead against Biscuit's neck, not making a sound, the way he'd cried at the bus stop 2 years before. But it was different now. At the bus stop he'd been crying for what he'd lost. This was something else. "She put me at the center," he said when he could talk. 40 years I told myself I didn't deserve another one. Annie, and then I just shut the door. And this kid draws me at the center of her whole tree and goes over it 3 times so it'll be dark. He laughed, wet and broken and real. 3 times, Earl. "You earned it," I said. "No," he shook his head against the horse. "That's the thing, that's the whole thing, you don't earn it. I didn't earn Annie, and I sure didn't earn losing her, and I didn't earn Sadie either. It just comes to you. Grace just comes to you undeserved at a bus stop on a Tuesday, and all you can do is not turn it away." He wiped his face. "I almost drove past. You remember, I almost drove past her." I remembered. I'll always remember. The truck slowing so gradual I thought it was a deer. Here's the part I find hardest to tell, so I'll just tell it plain. Wade got sick the next year. The bad kind. The kind money can slow down but can't stop, and Wade had more money than anybody, and it bought him 18 months instead of 6, and that was all it bought. He was 68 years old. Sadie was 11. I think about the unfairness of it more than is good for me. A man spends 40 years frozen, finally thaws, finally lets himself love a child the way he should have loved his first one, finally becomes the thing he was always capable of being, and then he gets 4 good years to do it in. 4 years. It's not enough. It's a robbery. I've made my peace with a lot of things in this life, but I have not made my peace with that. But here is what Wade did with his 18 months, and it tells you everything about who he'd become. He did not spend it in despair. He spent it building Sadie a world that would hold her after he was gone. He set up the money, all of it, the ranch and the leases and the rest, in a trust so airtight that no court, no relative, no resurfacing from anybody's past could ever touch it or her. He made Marisol her guardian, and made it so Marisol would never have to worry about money again either, so that the woman who'd helped raise Sadie could go on doing it without losing her own footing. He wrote letters, dozens of them, for Sadie to open on birthdays, on her graduation, on her wedding day if she had one. Letters for a daughter he knew he wouldn't get to see grow up. He wrote them in that hard businessman's hand gone shaky at the end, and he sealed them, and he gave them to me to keep and dole out, which is a job I will hold until the day I die. And he told her. He didn't hide it from her, the way people sometimes do with children. He'd learned the hard way with Annie what it costs to leave things unsaid. So he sat her down and told her he was sick and that the medicine wasn't going to be enough. And Sadie, who'd been left by everyone, whose whole life was a study in people disappearing. Sadie looked at him and the old terror came up in her face, and then something else came up over it. "You're not leaving me," she said. It wasn't a question, it was almost angry. "You promised. You said never as long as you're breathing." And Wade said, "I was there, I heard it, I'll hear it the rest of my life," Wade said. "And I meant it. As long as I'm breathing, I'm yours. That part's still true, sweetheart. I'm just not gonna be breathing as long as I wanted to." He took her hands. "But here's the thing I figured out that I didn't know when I was younger. Leaving isn't the same as dying. Your first mom, she left. She had a choice and she went. That's leaving. I'm not leaving you, Sadie, I'm just dying. And those are different. And I need you to know the difference. Because I need you to know I'd stay if staying was a thing I got to choose." I don't know if an 11-year-old can understand that. I'm 60-some years older than she was, and I'm not sure I understand it. But I think some part of her caught it and held it, the way she'd held the world's best mom mug, careful, so it wouldn't break. He died in the fall on the ranch in his own bed, with the windows open so he could hear the horses. Sadie was there. Marisol was there. I was there. He went quiet and easy at the end, which a hard life doesn't always earn you, but he got it anyway. Grace, undeserved, coming to you at the end the way it came at the beginning. The last thing he said that made any sense, he said to Sadie. She was holding his hand and he surfaced for a moment and looked at her, and you could see him gathering himself for it. "You were never left behind," he told her. "You hear me? Whatever you remember, whatever the bad dreams say, you were never left behind. You were just waiting for the right people to find you, and we did. We found you." Then he was gone. Sadie's 23 now. I'm an old man and I don't expect to be around a great deal longer myself, which is partly why I finally wrote all this down. Somebody should know it. Somebody should know what Wade Kessler did on a road outside Caldwell County, and what it cost him, and what it gave back. She runs the ranch. Came back to it after college. Everyone thought she'd sell it and go be something in a city. With all that money she could have been anything, anywhere. But she came home. She says the horses needed her. She says it like a joke, but she doesn't mean it like one. She found Danielle a few years back, her first mother. Found her clean and sober 11 years now, working at the very treatment center Wade had paid to send her to, helping other women drowning the way she'd drowned. They're not close exactly. You don't undo a bus stop, but they talk. Danielle sends a birthday card every year, has every year since the day she drove away, and Sadie keeps them all in a box, a cardboard box as it happens. She thought that was funny, in a sad way, when she noticed. And every year on a certain Tuesday in July, Sadie drives out to that stretch of road where the asphalt turns to dust, to the bus shelter, which is still there, still rusting, still with its faded, unreadable schedule. She doesn't make a big thing of it. She just sits on the bench a while. I asked her once what she does out there. I expected her to say she remembers, or she mourns, or she makes peace with it. What she said was, "I wait." And before I could get worried about that, she smiled and she said, "But it's different now. Back then I was waiting for somebody to come back. Now I just sit there and wait long enough to remember that somebody did." I asked her who she means, Danielle who left, or Wade who stayed. She just looked at me. Out past the bench, toward the road, toward the long, flat, dust-colored distance where, one Tuesday a lifetime ago, a truck slowed down so gradual you'd have thought it was a deer. She didn't answer,